honored guests, friends, colleagues, I'm very pleased to open this conference on the politics of humanitarianism in the occupied territories. About a year and a half ago, Sari, Hanafi and myself met in a conference organized by Leer on catastrophes in the age of globalization. It was a general discussion of changes in the way disasters are generated, accounted for, coped with in the global age. It was then that we realized that Israel, Palestine, has become an important point on the map of disaster zones in this age. And it was then that the initiative to do something about to try to contribute something to the discussion among activists and academics who work or think about the situation in the territories. This was when it started. In the last few days, there was a wave of hate mail addressed to us by some academics, right-wing academics. The main accusation was that humanitarianism was hijacked by radical leftists, and that we have produced and put forward a really imbalanced and biased conference. I would like to say something about this. It is a very well balanced conference. There are Israelis and Palestinians and internationals. There are academics and activists. There are people from various disciplines. But there is a bias, no doubt. It is the bias of all those who are really concerned with the plight of Palestinians in the territories. It is the bias of all those who understand that Israel, the state of Israel, is a sovereign that officially, de facto and de jure, controls the territories and yet forsakes the people there, and contributes in one way or another to the production of chronic disaster, at least a chronic disaster, what some observers have called a situation on the verge of catastrophe. And it is in order to speak and think about how the international and local communities in the fields of human rights and humanitarianism deal with this situation with the hope to contribute to an ongoing discussion between activists and thinkers, academics who are concerned with these questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Adi. My name is Sari Hanafi. I am so glad for this conference. This is, I would say, the first outcome of our events of this research group, in which I don't like to say a cooperation between Palestinian researcher and Israeli researcher, because in this research group, I mean, people who come, he cannot know who is Palestinian, who is Israeli. I mean, we were academic and thinking about what's happened in our region. I mean, so it's, I mean, the relevance of the nationality, I mean, it wasn't very relevant for the reflection. I think this event come in a very, I would say, there is a momentum of this international conference come from, I mean, it's without a precedent. We feel that the intensification of everyday colonial practices, Israeli colonial practices in Palestinian occupied territories, a very low profile of international community, and a dumping of depoliticized humanitarian aid, also without the precedent. So, I mean, I think it's time for reflection, for thinking what is going on. I would say there is very few signs happened just last 2 months, when international community and donor community started thinking, I mean, about macro level. I would say not more than 2 months. And there is some site, the last insight, I think it was the UNRWA that stopped channeling aid to Gaza for a few days until Israel, I mean, it was a negotiation. And I would like to hear about it from Peter Hansen. But I mean, also see the Swedish aid cooperation. They sent a very alarming, I mean, report to the Swedish Foreign Ministry, say we are losing times, money, etc., etc. And I think also that the last report of the World Bank to say if the humanitarian aid to Palestinians increase twice, that the level of poverty will decrease only 2%. I mean, the number of poor people will be decreased 2%. So I mean, while for instance Bigdar did a study to show just if Israel remove some checkpoint to allow the Palestinians to cross only from zone A B to zone B A B, I mean, don't change any political things. I mean, the number of the poor people will reduce to 6%. So we see how much, I mean, this machine of production of depoliticized humanitarianism is harmful for taxpayer in Europe, etc., in the United States, etc., and to I would say reducing the occupation. Reducing the cost of occupation and maybe perpetuating then this occupation. So let's just to say that this conference, we would like that it will be the occasion for thinking about some questions. Has occupied territories become a disaster zone? Is Palestine already or still on the verge of the humanitarian catastrophe, as an official Ziegler report put it? Who produced the knowledge and disseminate the representations of the disaster, and why is it so difficult to get an overall picture and what's really going on? Also, we have a question about the contribution of international humanitarian organizations and their effect in the political discourse. The role and the practices of this testimony, the duty of witness. Is the humanitarianism a mean of depoliticizing a political conflict or a new form of political activism? When we talk about a new form of political activism, it's about ISM, International Solidarity Movement, Ta'ayush, and so on, and the civil missions. What is the response of Western government and the UN to the humanitarian crisis and its political implications? What is the representation of the Palestinians, I mean, as victims of a humanitarian catastrophe in Israeli society between denial, normalization, and political mobilization, etc., etc. So just one word to say, I would like in the discussion of the different panel, we will see it during these 2 days, to be much more focused about analyzing the situation than to discuss the details of the situation. We are not here to discuss the situation, but I mean, why we are here, and what to think about the mode of action and not the action itself. Let's put it like that. So now I would like to introduce Peter Hansen, Commissioner General of UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Working Agency in the Middle East, who will represent a paper on the response of Western governments and the UN to the humanitarian crisis and its political implications. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and to both you, Sari, Hanafi, and to Ophir, I would like to thank you for organizing an event like this and for asking me to have the opportunity to spend some time. I was in the midst of the not so ritual thanks that you normally do, but really thanking the organizers of this event for bringing a group like this together, as you said, Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, Arabs, academics of different disciplines, balanced or unbalanced. We can discuss that in the course of the proceedings. For me, it's a welcome respite from the travails of working, as they say, in the field every day. And I will just try to address some of the issues that comes to mind when you think of the theme set for this conference. When you look at humanitarianism, and the politics of humanitarianism is how I first got the title, and what I would like to say, that should be, according to traditional ethics and ideology, a contradiction in terms. Humanitarianism is apolitical, and as soon as you start politicizing, you are not being a true humanitarian anymore. This is an ideology that we have tried to live with in the humanitarian community for many years. I'm sure when we hear from our Red Cross colleague here, he can, from his institution, give a very, very long story of the evolution of this concept and this contradiction in terms that we have all been struggling with, and we are struggling with. But I don't think we should struggle with it as a lie on which we live, as if we could dissociate all quote-unquote politics from all quote-unquote humanitarianism. We have to manage this relationship in a way that is ethically and morally and politically acceptable and correct. Now, in a situation where the parties have not been able to arrive at a durable solution, and the international community has not been able to effectively intervene to this end of dealing with the crisis, it is as if humanitarian action has become the substitute that would have to bear the burden of political failure. And political failure is what we have seen for over 50 years in this region. It has become particularly acute over the last 3.5 years. We have in UNRWA, and I will limit my remarks to the agency I know the best from having worked with it here in the region for over 8 years now. This agency has for more than 50 years been engaged in a process that I would hesitate to call just purely humanitarian, but a process where we have been involved dynamically with various state actors, with multilateral and regional bodies, and indeed with non-state parties, in order to be able to undertake our humanitarian mission. Without all the negotiation, without all the understanding, without all the dialogue, and without all the cooperation with others, we couldn't even get started doing anything. A great deal of our work consists in dealing with other parties and dealing with a number of perceptions and an even larger number of misperceptions surrounding our work and surrounding our mission. but still we are classified as a humanitarian organization. We are seeking to implement a humanitarian mandate in as apolitical a fashion as we can, but we are doing it in a highly charged and highly politicized environment, and we would be lying to ourselves and we would be lying to others as if we could entirely abstract from politics and political issues. Now I seem to have got my notes thoroughly mixed up from going over them in the car, but if you look at the way that politics permeate everything we do and we say, I'm sure you have all been aware of the language which is used and which is so enormously highly politicized. We've all been following the wall versus the fence, the killings versus the assassinations, and I couldn't help notice in the program, whichever version of the program it was, that when considering nomenclature, we have in the discussion here today, my co-panelist Nael Salman refers to it as the West Bank and Gaza, the Van Leer Institute program as the occupied territories, the ICRC as the autonomous and occupied territories, and I call it the occupied Palestinian territory because I have to be in line with General Assembly language. But I just take it as an example of how permeated we are in the choice of the smallest word and the smallest phrase in how we address this, as to try to underscore my point that to keep political nuances away from our discussion of any humanitarian issue is rather fraught with difficulty. I would like to try to address a number of themes or issues that I think illustrate this point from various dimensions, and I have chosen 8. Half an hour ago I had 9, but I think that I had better maybe end up with 6 or so. There are plenty of them, and time is limited. But one point I would like to start out making is that we remind ourselves that humanitarian action is people-centric, and it deals with and addresses the acute suffering and needs of peoples as individual human beings. Political actions, of course, are also involving individuals and human beings, but they are much more guided by perceived national or group or faction interests of actors, state actors and non-state actors. And we should also be aware that, and I think this is significant, we are living in decades where every aspect of national and international action is being increasingly informed by a human rights framework that barely existed or only in embryo when this crisis started, but which has evolved enormously strongly in the international and indeed in virtually all national communities over these 5 decades. And humanitarian responses in a human rights framework is looked upon or seen much more than it would have been when we started all this in the region, not merely as charity. UNRWA's work was really started by the Quakers, and UNRWA took over from the Quakers in 1950, and that was a charity-based enterprise. And if you look at the early resolutions establishing UNRWA, you will see a lot of charity-colored, flavored language. But today, we are seeing a rights-based humanitarianism eclipsing the needs-based charity approach to it. And it's a dimension that I don't think is always brought out, but which I think is worthy of a great deal of discussion and analysis, the relationship between the evolving concepts of humanitarianism and human rights, which come from different angles and have affected and influenced each other over a long time. What this means is that the victims of conflict and occupation are seen as having the right to receive assistance and protection rather than being just beneficiaries of charity of whoever drops a coin, while state parties, occupying powers, and international humanitarian agencies have an obligation to provide that assistance and that protection. We are increasingly seeing this in terms of rights and obligations, and that sharpens, in a way, the political dimensions of the interrelationship between the state actors, humanitarian organizations, donor countries, and the beneficiaries, in this case, the refugees. Second point that I'm sure that all of those of you who have been dealing with humanitarian work and theory and philosophy that we often overlook is that humanitarian responses often affect the conflict in unintended ways. Humanitarian actors tend to see themselves, maybe sometimes self-righteously, as neutral and impartial, above the fray. Assistance is perceived by the parties in terms of how it affects their interests and their position in a conflict. This can be due to the targeting of beneficiaries, who are targeted, who are not targeted, how are they targeted. It can be seen in terms of effect on wages and prices, substitution effects that frees up other resources and lets one or the other party in the conflict divert means to pursuing the conflict rather than just seeing to it that it serves the humanitarian purposes for which the aid was intended. These unintended consequences play out in the perceptions of parties in all conflicts, and they clearly play out also, as I'm sure we'll hear a lot about in this conference, on the parties in the conflict in the occupied territories. Let me give you a few examples of this. There is a perception among many Israelis, and this is something that I hear about virtually every day, that by helping the refugees, Israel's enemies, we are helping the enemies of Israel, and hence we are the enemies of Israel. I don't know whether this is a majority or a minority point of view. I must say, in all fairness to many of the Israeli authorities we deal with, they have a totally different perception. They have a full understanding of their moral and legal obligations to allow humanitarian aid to go through, and they are fighting mightily within their various bureaucratic political systems to facilitate this. But I feel this tension very often in dealing with Israeli authorities, and indeed in following the debate as I do in Israeli society, this dual perception of whether UNRWA is helping Israel carry out its duties as an occupying power, or helping the enemy, as it were, in extreme cases perceived as. And this is a tension that, of course, politicizes a great deal of what we do and how we deal with the parties to the conflict. There is a perception among many international organizations, and as was mentioned earlier, among many donors, that a main effect of the international humanitarian aid to the Palestinians is having one main effect, namely subsidizing the occupation by freeing Israel from whatever cost carrying out its humanitarian responsibilities would have entailed, and freeing these from whatever other purposes. These are things that internal memos circulating among donors, I would say, are taking on increasing power. Maybe it's an expression of frustration. Maybe it's a way of, on the part of donors, for them to say, well, if others will not observe their obligations, well, we can't go on forever observing our humanitarian obligations. A third dimension to the politics of humanitarianism is that both parties, all parties to all of these conflicts, seek to affect the nature of the humanitarian response, and they attempt to choose the humanitarian actors to implement them and to fashion the way in which these humanitarian actors would work. The tools that can be utilized for this can include the restriction or expansion of the humanitarian space, giving different forms of access as gatekeepers to the humanitarian space in a conflict zone, by regulating humanitarian access and by seeking to change the applicable frameworks and mandates for humanitarian action, and influencing the terms of public and political debate about this. May I just make a reference to an obvious dimension of this, the Israeli practice of regulating humanitarian access in the OPT based on political developments and security elements. I'm not saying here that we live in a perfectly normal situation. We wouldn't be here if we lived in a perfectly normal situation. Israel has a number of very obvious security needs that they must respond to because their population demands it from their democratically elected government. So we can't have any issue with that. What we can have issue with is when it is, to our best judgment, a pure political coloring that determines whether the humanitarian gates are opened or they are closed. A recent example where we had to say enough is enough. Other actors have said that, but we were brought to the point where we had to say enough is enough when we cannot have our containers brought out so they can be reloaded and brought in again, empty containers, which it should be very easy to check and to see whether anybody is hiding in them or whatever. It came to a point where we said we can simply not go on with this charade anymore, and we have to stop our distributions of food, with our stocks being very low at that point. Fortunately, it took only a couple of days after we announced this until the Israeli authorities said, okay, you can bring out the containers and bring in the containers at a certain rate per day. We saw that as a sign of a willingness to cooperate reasonably, and without waiting for all the problems to be solved, we took up very quickly again the food deliveries, and we have only had an extremely marginal delay in distributions, if that has been sensed by the parties on all, fortunately. There are other ways in which the parties can seek to select the humanitarian agents. We have it in a constant discussion about UNRWA and the UNHCR and the degree to which more protection could be given to refugees if UNHCR's mandates applied rather than UNRWA's mandates. This has also been quite politicized and has been used to say that UNRWA only works to prolong the conflict, the refugee problem, by not making any of the moves towards solutions that UNHCR has done over the years. Well, it just happens that the solutions which UNHCR has applied repatriation or resettlement wouldn't work in this area by dictate of an international organization, being UNHCR or UNRWA, because they run so much completely counter to the political demands and interest in the conflict. Then, of course, something that we feel very often, and which not least I feel on behalf of UNRWA, that I have given interviews, I have written op-ed pieces expressing what I see, expressing what my judgment of it is, and it would be an understatement to say that Israeli authorities have been annoyed that an international aid official shares his experiences, his perceptions, and his views on what is going on, no matter in how balanced a way I would try to do that. We are supposed to be eyeless, earless, and speechless actors in this area. And if we were that, we would live up to old-fashioned notions of the complete apolitical neutrality, if you say, but we feel that we cannot, in all conscience, tie our tongues and blind our eyes. Another way in which, fourth dimension in which we are getting a political content into our work is caused by the very complex nature of the conflicts in the globalized world we live in. I'm speaking about this in general terms, but it is also very true in the occupied territories. It is very difficult to distinguish in a clear-cut way between combatants and between non-combatants, fighters in the conflict. We have it on both sides. We have had encounters on the part of UNRWA with a few cases of armed elements of Palestinians taking over our institutions. We have had encounters with settlers throwing stones and molesting staff, and where you cannot see who's who very easily, it does become very, very difficult. One dimension that I would mention, you might have heard about, is UNRWA has been accused of not identifying and not reporting and not cooperating with rooting out terrorism in the camps. Don't we know that there are terrorists in the camps, and why don't we identify them, report to them, and have them taken care of by whatever authorities are supposed to take care of them? We've been accused of hiding terrorist activities in our camps, our schools, etc., all of which I am very, very pleased to be able to say without any hesitation is all made up for the occasion of delegitimizing and politicizing the work of UNRWA. There has not been a single case documented in which such activities have taken place, and even the Israeli Foreign Ministry has agreed that UNRWA cannot act as a spy agency for the IDF in the camps, even if we had the capacity to do it, which we don't. But it is an effective way of politicizing and trying to delegitimize the work of UNRWA. Fifth, there's a dimension of politics of humanitarianism that is not often very much discussed because it is not quite kosher to do it in good humanitarian company, and that is the politics of humanitarianism among the various humanitarian actors, and what that leads to by way of politicizing donor relationships among themselves and donor humanitarian actor relations. It might be a dimension you have not been dealing much with, but it is one that I think is emerging and being more and more important. You can see it in the way that certain governments, for ideological reasons, will try to favor, say, Christian groups or other denominational groups. You can see it how there has been particular attention paid by a number of Arab countries to Islamist groups and so on, and that is a dimension of politicization of humanitarian aid, which I think is gaining quite a bit in importance these days. We also have another dimension in the sixth dimension, which are the long crises. I think I'll limit myself to 6 dimensions then, and I'll see which one I will choose of the ones I have left. We do have a dimension in the long-term conflicts versus the short-term ones. This is the longest-running humanitarian crisis and action in the world, I believe, having dealt with a great many of them in a former capacity. And as the crisis prolong, you cannot stay in a constant high emergency gear. You will somehow have to play on other strings or use other arrows in your arsenal, and that means that you have to bring in developmental aspects, because to the degree that you don't, you are just seeing increased dangers of humanitarianism becoming a substitute for political action, and when the attention runs out, you will just see a decreasing fading away of both political action and of humanitarian engagement. That has very much to do with the different degrees of engagement of donors in different political contexts. If you look at what was given to Kosovo in terms of humanitarian aid per capita, Boutros-Ghali, when he called it a rich man's luxury humanitarian disaster, was comparing it to the then very, very severe disasters in the Central Lakes African region, where the humanitarian victims got a tiny, tiny fraction of what the Kosovars were getting. The Middle East and the Palestinians are somewhere in between. When the crisis is at a high point, we get as much as we asked for. When the crisis draws out, we very, very quickly drop in what the international community is willing to give. We are right now down to only about 35-40% of what we need for the ongoing emergency appeal from UNRWA. Let me, having given some of these dimensions that I was thinking of, end by saying that we in UNRWA can only look forward to the day when we no longer will have to deal with issues of politicized environments, politicized actors, fatigued donors, but when the time has come for addressing these issues politically, making superfluous any more humanitarian aid by having solved and settled that problem. I think there's nothing more we wish for in UNRWA but our aspirations to be made superfluous in that positive sense are being disappointed time after time. And I'm not so sure we live in a phase right now where we can have very high hopes to become superfluous in the very short term. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hansen. Okay, maybe we will allow a few questions and then, please, behind. Nael.
Thank you for your stimulating talk. You began the talk with a statement, I don't know if you agree with it or not, but a descriptive statement claiming that often humanitarianism is conceived as a failure of politics. And your talk was very frank, and I'd like to ask you whether you think the situation here is actually humanitarianism is, or the humanitarian crisis is actually a success of politics, of Sharon's politics and so forth. Whether you would think that there is a rationality to the politics of creating this crisis.
We will collect some questions, please.
Very simple. I wanted to clarify.
Can you, everyone, present him or herself, please?
My name is Arlene Kushner. I am an independent journalist. You mentioned the fact that there are charges against UNRWA regarding terrorism, and that there has not been a single documented case.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't catch case of what? Of someone involved with UNRWA who was also connected to terrorism? Because you talked about gunmen from the outside coming in. So I'd like to please understand.
I'm talking. Oh, sorry.
Just please behind.
I want to ask,
Sorry,
there are so many of us activists and different NGOs and independent groups and missions that are also viewing violations of human rights and other things that may use for later humanitarian work, and also to help assess the situation on the ground. How do you utilize all that information, or maybe you don't, or are you getting all that information?
Last question, if there is? No. Okay, please.
I just was wondering, what kind of audit mechanism does UNRWA have to check on any of the accusations that are made against them? And what internal audit do you publish this with?
Okay.
Thank you very much. And first, for the paradoxical question about whether the humanitarianism is a success of politics. If I understood the drift of it right, and maybe I didn't, we would be more and more needed for more and more humanitarian work, the more certain policies and certain politics succeeded. I will not go into say which politics make humanitarian work more necessary than other types, but what I was saying was any sharpening of the conflict, any moves that make it more difficult for us to see the end of the tunnel, see solutions to it, would tend to increase the need for humanitarian work, which to me is something that we would rather be without. We should work in a normal mode of building capacities. And let me say, by the way, that before the Intifada, UNRWA, 90% of UNRWA resources goes into primary health care and education. And if that is anything, it is building human capital for self-reliance and for development. And that is what we would like to return to expending all our resources on. Unfortunately, both primary health care and secondary, tertiary health care, as well as education, is suffering, and we are not achieving the human development goals we should. Once a solution is found, that can be passed on to whoever else can do it, and it should no longer be a humanitarian agency being responsible for that. But until then, I see it, and I see many donors and many commentators seeing it the same way, that we are perhaps prolonging the conflict by freeing resources. We are perhaps subsidizing the occupation, and that has made many humanitarian organizations ask themselves, should we, if that is true, really still be here, or should we get out of here? It's a very difficult choice, and I don't see any easy right answers to it. Terrorists documented or undocumented. What I meant was we have had many charges of things going on in UNRWA institutions. UNRWA staff having been guilty of this or that terrorist act. Now, there has been one conviction of an UNRWA staff member out of about 12,000. That conviction was extracted, I think I can say, his lawyers certainly say so, after almost a year and a half, a year and 3 months in captivity without anybody having any access to him. It is based on signing a confession of having transported some people in his car. That was the extent of it, having signed that on a Hebrew document, a language that he does not understand. So I would say that with that one exception, out of 12,000 staff, none have done things that would lead to convictions in military courts. I have issued several letters to our staff reminding them of their duties as UN staff, not to be partisans in the conflict. Many of the staff have accused me of limiting their freedom of speech, of limiting their freedom of whatever political expression they feel they can make, but they have really not done it. The things about weapons being found in schools and in summer camps and so on. I know there have been summer camps where there have been military exercises. They have been organized by other organizations. Never any have been organized by UNRWA. And there is not a shred of evidence to support this. But I suppose we must live with the fact that we are the subject of these kinds of campaigns where anything goes. It is frustrating, it is maddening sometimes, but I hope that people will sit down and look at the documentation or the lack of documentation and see what UNRWA actually does. And I think that these charges will have no credibility anymore.
Very simple question.
So,
It follows. Just
Yeah.
12,000,
Staff.
23,000 staff.
In the occupied territories, we have 12,000.
Okay.
And the rest of them are in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Yeah. Oh, the next one, what we do with all the information that is being collected. I wish we had much more of an analytical capacity, and I wish there was much more of an analytical capacity in the totality of the humanitarian human rights community, so we could get better order in our facts and data and so on. But it is not there, the perfect model of data collection and analysis. But there is quite a bit. UNRWA does quite a bit. The Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs does quite a bit, and a number of NGOs do an admirable work within their various areas. Audits, how are we checked? We have our own internal audit. We are externally audited by the Canadian Auditor General with a team. We have our own inspection facilities, and if any country or anybody credible is suspicious about something going on, they've had a standing invitation from me to send in the GAO or the FBI or the Scotland Yard or whoever else. We are interested in having a clear table to be transparent, and I think I can say we are. We are having a number of people out. That's not to inspecting for terrorism or anything. That is just to look at the effectiveness of delivery and so on. And anybody is very welcome to come and look at that. When I say anybody, I mean I'm not issuing an open invitation to 1,000 investigations, but our major donors and organizations and so on certainly are.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Hansen. And we should. Sorry, you will not get the program. Okay, Maya.
I just wanted to make a remark about this issue of the thing that you raised, which was quite a central one in your speech, about the claim that UNRWA is subsidizing the occupation. But actually, when we look at things and we see that the extent of damage that is caused by the Israeli occupation, I mean the destruction and the outcomes of the closure policy, employment, etc., and especially the destruction of homes, destruction of infrastructure. When we look at all of this, then we cannot say that UNRWA is actually subsidizing, because the donation that UNRWA has received do not cover even a small fraction of the damage that is inflicted by the Israeli forces, the Israeli armed forces. So this claim, I mean, when we look, I just wanted to make this comment because to kind of give an idea of the proportions that we are talking about.
I agree.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Peter Hansen. Okay, I call Nael, Salman, Stephane, Ojeda, and Adi Ophir to the panel here already. So, okay, so Stephane Ojeda, he is member. Ojeda. He's member of International Committee of the Red Cross for Israel and autonomous and occupied territories. So he will present a paper about the role of the international committees of the Red Cross, ICRC, guardian of international humanitarian law and humanitarian actors. Please.
Thank you.
You have 20 minutes.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So I was lucky I didn't prepare a PowerPoint presentation, so that will be easier. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to convey the sincere appreciation of the ACRC delegation for being invited to attend this conference and to share some remarks in this opening panel on this 2 days interesting topic. The main purpose of my talk today is to highlight, on the one hand, the role of the ICRC as guardian of international humanitarian law and as a humanitarian organization, and on the other hand, the compulsory need for the ICRC to remain and to be perceived as remaining independent and neutral in its approach of humanitarianism. I will illustrate these points by focusing on two particular examples of interest in this context. The end of the ICRC large-scale relief aid program in the West Bank in December 2003, and the ICRC press release of February 2004 concerning the West Bank barrier. And coming back to the comments from Peter Hansen, you can see how I choose my words, the West Bank barrier. Before doing so, I will deal very briefly, because I don't want to bother you with that, with some background information about our presence and activities in Israel and territories. Since 1967, we have been here on a conventional basis, namely the 1949 Fourth Geneva Convention, which was adopted in the aftermath of World War II. This convention, which was ratified by Israel in 1951, deals with the protection of civilians in times of war, and especially with situations of occupation. Since 1967, we have been qualifying the situation in this context as belligerent occupation, thus allowing de jure the presence and operations of the ICRC in this context. In terms of operations, the ICRC delegation in Israel and territories is the oldest one and remains today among the biggest operational ICRC delegation in the world. So we cannot compare the figures of staff members with UNRWA. So don't laugh when I will tell you the number of people we are working with. We have the delegation based in Tel Aviv, 2 sub-delegations, one in Jerusalem, one in Gaza, plus 12 offices dispatched to different districts of the West Bank and Gaza and Golan Heights, with a total of 250 staff members, including 65 expatriates. The main activity of the ICRC is to monitor the implementation and respect of international humanitarian law by Israeli and Palestinian authorities. We do this through a wide range of activities, including protection, that's our main activities, protection activities, What does that mean? That means that ICRC delegates monitor on a daily basis in the field respect for IHL, International Humanitarian Law, and ensure that those living under occupation have access to the basic essential needs. Whenever necessary, the ICRC makes confidential representations to the concerned authorities. Another set of activities, a huge one, is detention activities. ICRC delegates regularly visit Israeli and Palestinian places of detention to monitor treatment and living conditions of detainees. Once again, findings are discussed directly and confidentially with the detaining authorities. Family links activities. You know that since 1968, the ICRC has been running a program that allows families from Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Golan to visit their relatives detained in Israel. The exchange of Red Cross messages between detainees and families is also another way to maintain family links. Another set of activities is relief. We have a house destruction program. For those whose house has been destroyed or damaged, they receive ICRC relief kits and sometimes tents. And we also have a big water relief program. Another set of activities is cooperation with national societies. The ICRC is supporting in different ways the Magen David Adom on one side and the Palestinian Red Crescent Society on the other side. And finally, last activity is a training in IHL for various public, academics, policemen, prison staff, civil administration staff, checkpoint officers, etc., NGOs also. So, let me turn now to the first case I told you earlier about, the end by December 2003 of the large-scale ICRC relief aid program in the territories. The question is, given the situation in the territories, how come a humanitarian organization like the ICRC has reached out such decision to stop the programs? A short answer would be, assistance is not a long-term solution. And I would like to develop this answer. Following Israel's large-scale military operation in spring 2002 and subsequent long-term closures and curfews in the West Bank, the humanitarian situation within Palestinian cities and villages has deteriorated dramatically. The severe measures imposed in the territories over the past 2 years, especially the internal closures, have resulted in a lack of access to income-generating activities and consequently basic goods and services. This has led to a general collapse of the economy. For the first time since it began working in the region, the ICRC in June 2002 decided to launch large-scale emergency assistance programs in favor of the most vulnerable families in the West Bank. These programs were always intended to constitute an exceptional measure in response to an emergency situation. As a reminder, only emergency situations fall within the mandate of the ICRC. The ICRC elaborated a voucher program to support the local economy. In cooperation with the Palestinian Ministry of Social Affairs and local committees, 20,000 vulnerable urban families were selected according to objectively established criteria. In rural areas of the West Bank, the ICRC, together with the United Nations World Food Programme, have achieved distributing food and household items to 30,000 vulnerable families. Both ICRC programs have reached out at the aim of helping some 300,000 people. So why did we stop? From the start, the ICRC has always emphasized that its assistance activities in the West Bank are planned for the short term. It has repeatedly drawn the attention of Israeli and Palestinian authorities and other stakeholders to this fact. The crisis in the Palestinian territories has changed. what began as a short-term emergency has turned into a long-term economic breakdown that cannot be addressed by humanitarian aid, whatever its scale and scope might be. According to the Fourth Geneva Convention, and that's where you can see that we come back to this double role, also guardian of IHL, it's the primary responsibility of the occupying power, in this case the State of Israel, to make sure that the people living under its occupation have sufficient access to food, water, health services, work, and education. Humanitarian organizations should not and cannot, to take back the question which was asked at the end of the previous session, humanitarian organizations should not and cannot act as substitutes for an occupying power. The long-term solution is not to support the occupied population with humanitarian assistance, but rather to ensure that its basic rights under international humanitarian law are respected. Thus, the government of Israel, but also, and I insist, the international community, or the states also ratify the Geneva Conventions, must face their responsibilities and enable the Palestinian population to take care of their basic needs. To further illustrate the specific mandate of the ICRC, I would like to talk briefly of the recent ICRC press release concerning the West Bank barrier. On 18 February 2004, the ICRC issued a press release stating that the West Bank barrier causes humanitarian and legal problems. Once again, the ICRC played its double role. First, for the protection and assistance of all victims of armed conflicts occupation, and the second is a reference organization for IHL. We focus on the humanitarian consequences of the West Bank barrier and also on the legal aspects by stating that the West Bank barrier, in as far as its route deviates from the Greenland into occupied territories, is contrary to IHL. The question is, why had the ICRC chosen to make a public statement on this subject? Because we have been mandated by the international community to monitor the application of IHL. And in doing so, we are frequently asked and expected to give a legal reading of a situation or measure that is subject of controversy. Moreover, in line with its traditional working modalities, the ICRC has communicated on a bilateral and confidential basis its legal and humanitarian consents to the Israeli authorities since the construction of the barrier began. This dialogue continues. Monitoring by ICRC delegates in the field continues. And it has resulted in the accumulation of a large amount of information concerning the humanitarian, upon which an informed opinion can be based. Thanks, Adi. The choice to inform the public at large has been made as soon as such a step was possible and deemed necessary to obtain desired results without reaching hasty conclusions within the relevant legal framework. To come back to what Peter Hansen said at the beginning, where these two ICRC moves, the one concerning the end of assistance programs and the one on the West Bank barrier, perceived as political moves? Yes and no. Yes, because of the highly politicized situation in Israeli territories, and sorry to simplify, but whatever you do or say may be taken as a political stand. And no, because of the well-known and respected principles of independence, neutrality, and impartiality of the ICRC. I'm finishing. Basically, after these two events, the quality of the dialogue with all interlocutors in Israel and Palestinian sides has not been damaged at all. As far as the ICRC is concerned, it's the humanitarian and legal concerns that drive our action all around the world. And in order not to be perceived as driven by political concerns, we need also to carry out our humanitarian duties in a depoliticized environment. This has also an impact on our security. In another occupied territory, namely Iraq, our delegation, as well as the one of the UN, was attacked, and we lost several colleagues because of this non-clear environment. As a conclusion, I would like to emphasize that in this evolving world, war on terrorism, the "you are with us or against us" doctrine, the blurring lines between political, military, humanitarian actions, the ICRC will keep going with its double role as a humanitarian organization guardian of IHL and remain guided by its basic principles. Our humanitarian action is impartial, it needs to be independent from political decision-making processes, and is neutral. We are strongly advocating for the preservation of space for independent and neutral humanitarian action, of space for what we call the third combatant, the humanitarian action. This is central to a vision of humanitarianism in the 21st century. We understand that every humanitarian actor cannot and will not apply those same principles. We have no means nor the intention to impose it. However, we do insist that our approach be respected by all. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephane, especially for keeping the time. Now, I address to Nael. Nael Salman. Yeah, I present. Okay. No, it's in the end. Sorry. Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry for the problem that happened before, but this presentation may take your attention now because it has too many slides, but I think it will be interesting for you to see what's really happening and what happened maybe in the occupied territories, Palestinian territories in the West Bank and Gaza. I will just start with just to remind you of what happened in 1947 when the United Nations made its partition plan to divide Palestine into two states, a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. And the plan failed during that time because the land designated for the Jewish state was around 52%, while the Jews there only owned about 7%, while the land designated for the Palestinian state was 44%, while they owned around 93%. So, that was the Palestinian state was supposed to be, and this was supposed to be the Israel, the Israeli state, or the Jewish state. Then, as you know, after the war, the Arab population lost the war, and they lost also 78% of Mandate Palestine, which were now the West Bank, you see here, and Gaza. The West Bank today has an area of around 5,855 square kilometers, while the Gaza Strip is 365 square kilometers. You know, after 1967, it was reoccupied by Israel. after 1967, Israel started to implement its settlement strategies inside the West Bank. We see here in map showing the Israeli settlements in blue, and in gray is the master plans of the settlements. We see that it was a policy to control the West Bank after 1967. We see also that in order to do this, the areas were divided into colonies, closed military areas, protected areas, in addition to the settlements. You see that in green is the protected areas, the closed military areas in pink, and in blue the settlements. Also after 1967, Israel changed the Jerusalem municipality borders to include some parts of the West Bank, especially in Bethlehem area, south of Jerusalem, and in the north near Ramallah. And we see here the plan of municipality of Jerusalem. And we see that also the Palestinian neighborhoods were annexed after 1967 to Israel in yellow. The settlements in East Jerusalem attempted to annex or to confiscate all open spaces in East Jerusalem. As we see, the blue color is the settlements, and the yellow also the Palestinian built-up areas. We see that there is no any open space left inside East Jerusalem because it was occupied by constructing the Israeli settlements. In addition to the Jerusalem municipality borders, Israel also tried to expand the borders of municipality of Jerusalem and to create the metropolitan Jerusalem or the greater Jerusalem. We see that there are now 3 settlement blocks in or surrounding East Jerusalem or Jerusalem. We see the Gush Etzion in the south, in the west Ma'ale Adumim, and Givat Ze'ev in the north. We see today, after the separation wall, we drafted not the map of the metropolitan Jerusalem, but we added to it the separation wall around Jerusalem, what's called today is the Jerusalem envelope. And we see those blocks are included now inside the wall and are attempted to be annexed to Israel. Also, that what we have seen also in the peace negotiations, like Gush Etzion block was always not negotiable. It was all time during all the plans with Israel. Now the problem of Ma'ale Adumim, you know about it. There were many attempts to annex also Ma'ale Adumim to Israel. I will start here also with the peace process, what happened during the peace process in the Madrid conference, with the basis of Madrid conference that were based on the United Nations resolutions 242 and 338, and on the principle of land for peace. The resolutions called for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the areas occupied in 1967 war, and that was the basis for the Madrid conference to come to a just and a peaceful solution between the Palestinians and Israelis. We see here what happened during the peace process, the phases. We see that the first step was the Gaza Jericho first, here at the top, and then the divisions and the percentages of land given to Palestinians. In Oslo II, it was agreed that West Bank and Gaza territory, except for issues that should be negotiated in the permanent status agreement, that this phase should be completed within 18 months from the date of inauguration of the Council. That means that 95% after 18 months should be transferred to the Palestinian jurisdiction, while the 5% will remain until the final solution. But you will see what happened today. Since Oslo, and Oslo started with 10%, as you see in dark brown, I think, the area transferred it totally to the Palestinian Authority. And 71% were divided first to areas A, B, and C. Areas A, let me say that it is totally under Palestinian control. Areas B is under, should or supposed to be under the Palestinian civil administration, while the security matters and the military matters under Israeli control, while Area C is totally under Israeli control. We see that after 12 years of negotiations, let me say, the Palestinians were able only to get only 18% under their full authority. 60% stayed under Israeli control, while 22% stayed in joint cooperation between the Israelis and Palestinians. Also, during the negotiations, it was said in Article, I think, 31, that neither side shall initiate or take any step that will change the status of the West Bank and Gaza Strip pending the outcome of the permanent status negotiations. And we will see what happened next to this article. We see, for example, for the settlements, according to Israeli data, they said that there is around 149 Israeli settlements in the West Bank and Gaza in the year 2002. While according to the satellite images, the satellite images show that there are 282 Israeli built-up areas in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and 26 in Gaza. And currently, the number of Israeli settlers in the West Bank and Gaza are 435,000, while 7,000 of them live in Gaza Strip and 200,000 in East Jerusalem. Sometimes we hear also in the news that the Israeli settlers are around 200,000 in the West Bank, because the settlers of East Jerusalem are not included in this number. So if you add the 230,000 to the 200,000, there will be the number of 435,000. We see here in this chart the number of the settlements and the housing units in the settlements. We see that it was take the same inclination as the construction of settlements. So the settlements were constructed and filled with settlements. You see that it reached to this number. What we see here is the chart showing how this has happened since 1993 until the year 2003. And we see, for example, the land confiscation, how much land confiscation was during the different Israeli prime ministers' regimes, from Prime Minister Rabin until Prime Minister Sharon. We see, of course, now the highest percentages of land confiscation or the house demolitions took place during the period after 2002. We see the house demolition, for example, in 2003, what happened, how it accelerated very rapidly. I will go back now to the settlements and outposts. We will see here, for example, the settlements in blue color, while the outposts are in red dots. We see the concentration of the red dots, or the new outposts that were installed, as we have seen after March 2001. There are 113 new outposts and 24 new built-up areas, let me say, or Israeli settlements, nucleus for settlements. We see the locations are mostly in the middle or the center of the West Bank, especially in the northern center. We see that there are some kind of corridors also near in Jerusalem or east of Jerusalem. We see some dots near Ma'ale Adumim in this area. Is around five outposts. In addition to the area near Ariel. I will come to that slide later to show you why those outposts were located on those certain areas. We see here the land grab and clustering strategy of the settlements. As we see here that there is the mother settlements like Kadim or Ganim. We see the satellite neighborhoods for the settlements in red circles. The settlement here in this area is not growing as a normal expansion, though it's according to satellite kind of planning. So they are far away from the settlement, from the mother settlements, around 3 or 4 kilometers far away from the mother settlements, in order to confiscate the land, the Palestinian agricultural lands in the middle. We see also that the settlements are connected by a certain road network in order to strangulate that area and add it in the future for the settlements. We have the same example, and this is an evidence of another example near Beit Furik, where the settlements are located in certain areas and far away from the mother settlement, and lands there were confiscated also, mostly agricultural lands from Palestinian citizens. In Bethlehem, this is Tukua colony, and what's happening is the same. We see that Nicodim colony and the settlements, there's the settlement of Tukua and the satellite outposts, and in order surrounding the area in order to annex it or make it a one settlement in the future. We see how Har Hadar was expanded. For example, it was built on that way. The outposts were put in on the other side, on the left side. We see also that those outposts, the caravans or the nucleus were put in areas that are really planned, well planned, according to a planning scheme or town planning scheme. We can see, for example, in the middle of the market, we see also the industrial area is planned before building the housing units. So the caravans were installed, infrastructure, roads, everything is really planned in order to expand this settlement. We see, for example, in the West Bank also what's happened to the Mount Abu Ghneim, and it was the only forest near Bethlehem. We see today the Har Hama colony took place instead of the pine trees in this mountain, and it was maybe the only recreational area in Bethlehem. We see that this mountain has been shaved and a new settlement was erected instead of it. I will come now to what's been talked about the natural growth in the settlements. We detected this in ARIJ since 1992 until 2002 in order to see if there is a kind of national growth in the settlement. We compared this with the Israeli growth rate, population growth rate inside Israel, about 2%, and now the actual population to population in the settlements. We see that according to the population growth rate, the number of Israeli settlers should be less than 300,000 by 2002, while today they are around 435,000. Why? We will see now why. This is because of the financial incentives, we believe, given to the Israeli settlers. The Israeli settlers, they receive a tax exemption of 7% in the West Bank and 10% in the Gaza Strip. In addition, that every settler receives a grant of 80,000 new Israeli shekel from the Ministry of Housing. Also, the Israeli government devoted $1.9 billion from its budget to the settlements in the year 2003. This is excluding East Jerusalem and what's happening in East Jerusalem with regard to the housing units built in there. Now I will talk about the the bypass road or the Israeli bypass roads inside the West Bank. Today there are around 734 kilometers of bypass roads, where what we see today that Palestinians are not allowed to travel on those bypass roads, especially, it's only now the white plates, yellow plates that are allowed to travel on those roads. Those roads disconnected the West Bank into several cantons. We see that those bypass roads, at a major point, there are checkpoints located on the major sections or the major roads on those bypass roads. And those the bypass roads and the checkpoints, they disconnected the West Bank into around 64 cantons, because Palestinians now mostly are not able, or they are able in very difficult situation to cross from one area to the other one. There are also now 757 barriers that let the people not able to travel from one place to another, or to travel in a very difficult way. Those barriers, like the checkpoints, like the earth mounds, the concrete blocks, the gates, all of them together, there are around 757 barriers. Also travel from one place to another. We see that before anyone was taking a way going from Bethlehem to Ramallah, he can reach it in 30 minutes. But today, with those checkpoints, with those under this current situation, it takes a person to reach Ramallah, especially if he goes through Bir Zayt or Surda checkpoint. He needs at least 3 hours to reach Ramallah, and going all the way, if he will be able to reach that place. We see here also what happened if we put the layers of the bypass roads and the settlements. We see that, for example, a settler, if he wants to attend or to visit a friend in another settlement in the south of the West Bank from the north, he can take a bypass road and reach from the upper north to the lower south in maybe 2.5 or 3 hours, while a Palestinian today, it takes him to travel in the alternative roads, trying to avoid the checkpoints. It takes him around 12 hours if he will succeed to visit a friend in comparison with that location. The same happened in the Gaza Strip. We see here that the Gaza Strip after the second Intifada was divided into 3 parts. We see that the Israeli tanks were located on the intersections, and we see what happened later. We took the satellite images, and we have seen that in 1999, if we take a look here in 2001, we see that 2 different changes happened in this area at the intersections, which were not seen in the satellite image of 1999. And what was this? It was the shaving of all trees on the way to connect Netzarim colony with Israel at the eastern side. So all trees were shaved and uprooted to construct a bypass road or a way to connect Netzarim to Israel. We see here the shavings or the uprooting of trees that happened in the Gaza Strip. We see, for example, the trees here. The area was full of trees, while in that picture or satellite image, it was all removed. And after the Al-Aqsa Intifada or the second Intifada, around 1 million of trees were uprooted: citrus trees, olive trees, and other kind of trees. After September 2000. Then in 2002, as we know, the story of the segregation wall that started on June 2002. It was supposed to have a 728 kilometers in length and surround the West Bank from all sides. Its width varied between 40 to 100 meters of this zone. We call it zone here and not like separation zone, or we call it segregation zone according to ARIJ concept, because it segregates the Palestinian built up area from their agricultural lands and Palestinian people from one to and another. Because many people live on the other side of the wall, many have their agricultural lands on the other side of the wall. Anyway, the wall, especially in the first phase, penetrated the West Bank with around 23 kilometers. This is north or east of the colony of Ariel. And in phase 2 of the project, it included, the phase 1 included 143 kilometers, and it is completed. We see here the types of the wall, where it is, for example, in concrete, and where it is in like a fence, 40 meters wide, and it has two typologies of the wall. One has a concrete wall with a height of 8 meters, and one has a metal fence, electrified fence with barriers of barbed wires. We see here. In the area, in the area that is separated between the in phase 1 between the wall and the green line, there are here we see that this is first. That it is the most fertile agricultural land, and it is located on the main water aquifer of the West Bank, and it includes around 30 artesian wells that supply the West Bank with around 5.5 million cubic meters per year. There are also 15 villages located inside this zone, and there are around 12,000 Palestinian citizens living in this zone. And now they are facing extreme difficulties because of the Israeli permits and the conditions put on them to get it. We see here this is a section of one type of the wall where it is a metal fence and 40 to 100 meters wide. We see a military road, barbed wires, etc. While this is another type which has 8 meters of high concrete wall with the military tower every 200 meters. We see here around Kalkilia the wall. These are typologies of the military area, military orders showing the path of the wall. And this is Kalkilia, that which became today surrounded by the wall on all sides except the eastern side, where there is only one entrance. As I mentioned earlier, many regulations were put to let the people pass, and many gates were put on that wall. Around today, there are around 49 gates in the walls from Salim, the village of Salim in the north of the West Bank, until El Kana settlement near in Ariel. You see here a type of one of the gates. Here are the orders showing the conditions that no one is able to enter to this area except the Israelis and the people who have a permit. And there are many conditions put in order to get this permit. And not all of the people were able to get permits, especially the Palestinian farmers living outside that area and wanted to go to their lands. Only 20% of them were able to get a permit from the Israeli authorities. Phase 2, it is around 43 kilometers in the northern part of the West Bank. In the south, also in phase 2, military orders were distributed. We put them together and we see that they are part of the Jerusalem envelope. We see here the villages south of Bethlehem, or the west of Bethlehem, Batir, Hussan, and Nahalin, according to the military order, how they became in a canton or in Bantustans. In Bethlehem, especially the western area is the most fertile area in Bethlehem, and 70,000 dunams will be segregated behind that wall, and cut off from the main city center or the main urban area in the middle. We see that the red is finished and the pink color is planned. This was distributed yesterday, also in Beit Jala. 175 dunums will be confiscated to construct the wall. The length of that section of the wall or segment of the wall is 3,415 meters with a width of 68 meters. And it will cut off the second forest of Bethlehem, which is the Kremezan, we call it the Kremezan Convent Forest. And also this area belongs mostly to Christian families that they grow in it the apricot trees. Also, there is Al-Walij village behind it that will be disconnected. We see here all the housing units. There are around 18,000 housing units will be built around Jerusalem, inside the settlements. For example, in Bitar Ali, 3,200, and Har Huma also 6,300 units. This according to the Ministry of Housing. This is maybe now the conclusion of what happened and the geopolitical situation of those contexts. We see this the separation or the zones according to Israeli point of view, which was shown on Channel 2. We drafted it, and we see also the similarities. That was what was broadcasted on Channel 2. This is the similar. This is the eastern and the western zones. And this is the map that was published on the Ministry of Defense, Israeli Ministry of Defense website on 26th of October 2003, showing the path of the wall. This is the schematic of the east, let me say the western wall. This is the eastern wall that is not exactly, many they say it will not be a wall, but it's according to Prime Minister Sharon that there is maybe no need for a wall in the Jordan Valley, but it will be secured through the checkpoints and the permits that will be given to the only citizens who live in this area. The checkpoints, we see that Jordan Valley don't have too many road networks or accessibility for Palestinian citizens. So it can be easily controlled by the Israeli military, especially on the access roads that lead to the Jordan Valley. With those zones, around 146 Palestinian communities will be trapped either inside the wall or will be affected by the wall. 288,000 Palestinians will be affected. The number of settlers on those two zones that are the Israeli government tried to annex them to Israel is around 390,000. And the total area of those zones constitutes around 46% of the West Bank area. We see here the effect on water. There are many effects on water, millions. Yeah, I'm just finishing. Impact on agriculture, we see how much there is impact on agriculture. I just want to show here the old and new maps, which were showing the Israeli plans as the strategic interest map of Israel in the West Bank, in the first map, and it was designed after 1969, and it was shown in 1982 at first. Then in 1992, it shows the eastern zone and the western zone at the green line, with the connection by those corridors, and separating the West Bank with white into three areas or cantons, the white areas, and one in the north, one in the middle, and one in the south. If we take a look at what happened today, or what happened in during the negotiations in Taba, we see that mostly the area which is in blue, in that area is still the same. The area in light brown is the area in the upper side, the area in the middle is in Jerusalem, nothing there. Jerusalem is connected to the Jordan Valley. And what was offered to the Palestinians in Camp David, it's just very similar to what happened or what was shown in the strategic interest map. We see there the corridor are there. Jerusalem also are there, connected with the Jordan Valley. This dark yellow area near the green area was supposed to be leased to the Palestinians for 100 years. And this is the situation, let me say, today according to the Israeli plans and the anticipations. The segregation wall, the white is the Palestinian areas, and the eastern zone, which the Israelis, the recent government still thinks to keep it under its control. We see here also today the 6 blocks that Israel was mentioning before. Prime Minister Sharon went to Washington and met President Bush, and those were the settlements. ARIJ, which is deep 23 kilometers inside the West Bank, is still there. And on this visit, the Prime Minister got the following guarantees: no return to the 1967 borders, no right of return to refugees to their homeland in Israel, recognition of the root of the segregation plan, accepting the retention of the 5 settlement blocks inside the West Bank. These are the main points. We don't need to talk about them. This is the situation of today. And the only 4 settlements to be dismantled according to, this is ARIJ conception after analyzing all of the situation, that only 4 settlements will be dismantled from the West Bank, especially in the northern area.
Okay, Nael.
Yeah, it's finished. Just this to show. The two sides declared that they viewed the West Bank in the beginning that as a one entity. These are the stages of those. What happened after the negotiations, and they said that nothing will happen during the peace negotiations until the final solution will be reached. And from fiction to facts, what was in Taba and what's being reached in Taba until Taba, and the situation until today. And here's the last slide, is to show only the population density, or a comparison between the population density between Israelis and Palestinians after this. That in Palestine it will be in the Palestine around 1,234 persons per square kilometer population density. In Israel 203. In the West Bank 60 for the settlers and 725 for the Palestinians. In Gaza Strip you see that 51 square kilometer persons per square kilometer, while for Palestinians is 4,454 persons per square kilometer. Thank you.
Thank you, Nael,
No questions.
for this lively and sad presentation, I would say. Okay, so now I call Adi Ophir. He's a professor of philosophy in Tel Aviv University, to present a paper. In fact, this is a joint paper. It will be segregated in 2 parts. One will be a lecture by Adi Ophir today, and tomorrow by Ariella Azulay. So it's about the economy of violence.
Thank you. In the postmodern world, disasters, even natural disasters, don't simply occur. They are always mediated by human agency, and often directly produced by human action. When we started writing this paper, we wanted to give an account of the way Israel is responsible for transforming the occupied Palestinian territories into a disaster zone, and for reproducing there conditions of a chronic disaster on the verge of a real humanitarian catastrophe. As we have proceeded in our work, we have come to understand that standing on this threshold of catastrophe is not a contingent result of the way Israel governs the territories in the last few years, but rather a constitutive element in the modus operandi of its ruling apparatus. This morning I will present some excerpts from the analysis that has led us to this conclusion. Tomorrow Ariel Azoulay will go on to describe in more details the threshold itself and some of its implications for the humanitarian enterprise. Since the beginning of the second Intifada, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has become ever more violent, and the violence has become ever more spectacular. Spectacular violence creates a sense of symmetry between the two parties, and is easily captured in figures of speech like cycle of violence or unending chain of revenge. But these metaphors are misleading, for spectacular violence is but one aspect and one component in an entire economy of violence. In order to understand this economy, it is necessary to analyze the functional and structural relations between different forms and occurrences of violence, and the overall patterns of its distribution among the parties to the conflict. Only on this basis it is possible to grasp the systematic production of chronic disaster in the occupied territories, which has brought the Palestinian to the verge of humanitarian catastrophe. Violence is usually associated with an outburst of physical force that hurts and destroys bodies. But an action may also be violent when the eruption of force is suspended, and insinuation and deterrence take the place of material contact with the body. Violence is always exercised in an interplay between outburst and suspension, and its efficiency depends on maintaining a gap between these two poles, direct and suspended violence. Political forms of society differ characteristically in the way this gap is structured and maintained. Modern liberal democracy, for example, strives to reduce direct violence, to replace it with suspended violence, and to make both as invisible as possible. In a liberal democracy, the transition from suspended to direct violence is supposed to take place only according to the law and only in order to enforce the law. When the government loses or cannot establish its legitimacy, when political rule is unilaterally enforced on those subjected to this rule, and the memory of this enforcement is still fresh, suspended violence is not enough. But even in the most extreme situations, the two forms of violence coexist and interact. If the outburst of force were to continue uninterruptedly, without any lull, the parties to the conflict would be destroyed in a struggle to the death. Differences between forms of governments and the structure of domination may be described in terms of patterns of suspension of violence and modes of deterrence, no less than in patterns of using direct violence. Since the outbreak of the Second Intifada, Israel's regime of occupation in the territories is characterized by an unstable relation between direct and suspended violence, and a massive and extensive deployment of military forces that makes possible a visible, intensified presence of this suspended force and shortens the time span required to let these forces loose. Military forces are deployed everywhere, as in a state of war, but there is no war, for war itself is being suspended. There are only numerous targeted killings with their local collateral damage, so-called collateral damage, suicide bombings, shootings, destruction of infrastructure, demolition of houses, violent detention and incarceration. Despite the sharp increase in the number of violent clashes, which no doubt has its own cumulative impact, the majority of the soldiers stationed in the occupied territories do not occupy anything. Their violence is kept confined to their guns, clubs, or tanks. It is insinuated at the checkpoints gate or by the anonymous voice declaring a curfew. This is precisely the way this violence is most often exercised. Anywhere this violence is present and may suddenly erupt, which means virtually everywhere and at any time, it constrains the Palestinians' movements and impacts their action. The suspended violence is effective without bursting out because it forbids, deters, and delays, complicates simple actions, undermines preferences, undercuts daily schedules, drives people crazy, and sometimes even kills. Its impact is often more or less, or not less disastrous than that of direct violence. In fact, the more intense the presence of suspended violence, the more blurred the distinction between these two forms become. The occupied territories have become a zone of indistinction between these two forms of violence, in which the body of the occupied is constantly exposed to all sorts of dangers, forsaken and abandoned. Most of the time, and almost everywhere, the force stored away in the various instruments of violence does not flare up. Usually the occupied prefer to obey, turn back, stop working, stand in line, undress, stand up before a camera, speak softly, or fall silent. Their resistance is neutralized without resort to direct violence. But this success of the ruling power is ephemeral. It must be generated again and again through the ever more intensified, threatening presence of suspended violence and more frequent outbursts of direct violence, in direct relation to the shrinking deterrent power of suspended violence. Deterrence shrinks not because less military might is involved, of that there is only more, but because the Palestinians have less and less to lose. It takes over more awesome displays of power to achieve the same result, the annihilation of the Palestinians' power and will to resist. The ruling apparatus in the territories lacks three main forms of domination, which in normal circumstances enable governments to rely mainly on signs and symbols of suspended violence, and to reduce its visible presence and avoid resort to direct violence. First, there is no law, for the legal system in its entirety has been suspended, being substituted by a series of ever-changing ad hoc orders and regulations. The arbitrary nature of the ruling power means that no rule is effective unless it is accompanied by the visible presence of suspended violence. The ruling apparatus requires the massive presence of suspended violence simply in order to announce and change the rules and use them to regulate the behavior of the occupied. The occupied, on their turn, need the same violent presence in order to learn about the rules and understand what is expected of them, how to go to work, to school, which way to take in order to buy bread or plant a bomb. Second, the ruling apparatus operates almost no disciplinary sites, except for prisons and detention camps, whose role is not actually to discipline, but to indoctrinate or to reform, or not to indoctrinate, not to reform, but simply to exclude unwanted subjects. Third, as far as the Palestinian population goes, ideological apparatuses don't function either, whether through or independently of disciplinary practices. Of course, the Israeli ruling power is deeply invested in ideological production, but the only consumers of this ideology are Israeli citizens. The Palestinian uprising has virtually destroyed Israel's capacity to employ ideological or disciplinary means for governing the Palestinian population. In fact, the ruling power is incapable of constructing and shaping Palestinian individual as its own subjects. While the rule of law is suspended, and as the disciplinary and ideological apparatuses have ceased functioning, the Palestinians in the territories simply cannot become subjects of the Israeli sovereign, in clear contradistinction to the Palestinian citizens of Israel. The occupied Palestinian is not a subject, neither in the modern sense of this word, not even in its ancient Latin sense. Unlike the modern subject, he is not recognized as a bearer of rights and a source of knowledge and action. But neither is he a subjectus, someone who was clearly distinguished in ancient times from the slave, who obeyed his master out of faith and out of his own volition, and whose subjection was always part of a chain of subjection and authorization in which even the sovereign took part. The Palestinian occupied is neither a subject nor a citizen. He is a non-citizen and a non-subject who is subjugated by the ruling power but is not subject of the ruling power. He obeys out of naked fear and authority which is sheer arbitrariness to him. His political existence is reduced to the status of an object of power, its target, but also an object, that which stands in opposition to power, an obstacle in its way. From power's point of view, he is an addressee of symbolic action only because he conceived first and foremost as an address for violent action. Resistance may appear any time he dares to speak back to power, seizing the position of the aggressor. Indeed, without the mediation of law, ideology, and discipline, the ruling power must intensify the presence of suspended violence and resort to direct violence, always readily accessible. Instead of disciplining or educating its subject, power injures their bodies and damages their property. Direct violence is no longer restricted to the preservation of law and order, but is mainly related to the preservation of the deterrent power of suspended violence itself. The exercise of this power is of course met with resistance, but this resistance gives power an excuse to turn control into destruction and transform the place of resistance into a disaster zone. However, it is worth mentioning that in most of the violent events that involve destruction of space, of houses, roads, wells, and other kinds of infrastructure, everything that falls under what Amira has called weapons of light construction that have transformed the Palestinian living space, all this destruction has been the outcome of a planned policy which is meant to damage or annihilate the material environment without touching as much as possible human bodies directly. When citizens are good subjects of their government, power is in fact internalized to a greater or lesser degree. The non-citizens, subjugated by an arbitrary power that suspends the law and acts with no mediation, have internalized nothing. From their point of view, power must always act out in the open, be present on the surface of the space it controls, and can be understood only as an external, visible, threatening force, always in the midst of the interplay between disastrous outbursts of direct violence and the intensified presence of suspended violence. As non-citizens, the Palestinians also lack most of the legal means to negotiate with the ruling power over the way they are governed. If they do not want to resist openly or obey submissively, they can only try to evade power or deceive it, using all kinds of improvisations, simulations, dissimulations, in order to avoid looking suspicious. But they are always suspicious, at least as long as they maintain their ability to speak back to power. For the ruling power, their resistance is not only a matter of their actions, but of their very presence. The present Israeli government ignores the possibility, or the idea, that the continuous exercise of violence of all kinds calls for violent resistance and creates more violence than it is supposed to prevent. After every suicide bombing, official Israeli spokespersons are quick to declare that prevention can never be absolute, and hence there is no choice but to exercise more violence in order to prevent that unpreventable violence. Journalists, politicians, and average citizens thoughtlessly repeat these cliches. Violence is always presented by the average Israeli as preventive. One always generates violence in order to prevent violence. To win means to be the last to prevent. Violence that prevents violence, VPV, let's call it, assumes the existence of an inexhaustible source of violence that must not be allowed to materialize. Every Palestinian is, by his or her very presence, both a source of suspended violence and its addressee. But in contradistinction to the visible obtrusive presence of suspended violence on the Israeli side, the Palestinian threat is mostly clandestine, and great efforts are required in order to expose it. Therefore, it is necessary to threaten, to restrict movement and control it, to intrude into places in order to monitor them, and to monitor places in order to intrude into them, to detain in order to investigate, and to investigate in order to detain, to destroy cultivated land in order to uncover, and to uncover in order to destroy, to impose curfew and siege, keter and seger, etc., etc. VPV is productive, not only destructive. It transforms space, establishes new constructions, invents new instruments and methods of control, produces and distributes anxieties, threats, rumors, and innumerable risks. This violence has a totalizing character. Without it, we are told, everyone will be forsaken. In order to give it free rein, anyone may be forsaken. It is constantly at work. It should not cease for a moment. It will never go on vacation. It is here to stay. The entire Palestinian space is dominated by this crazy logic. Walter Benjamin proposed a useful distinction, useful for normal political conditions, at least, including revolutionary ones. A distinction between violence that constitutes law and violence that preserves it. The suspended violence we are describing seems to be out of joint with this distinction. It does not preserve the law or constitute a new law. It does not even blur the distinction between these two forms of violence, the constitutive and the preserving. Suspended violence is being exercised in the territories, while the law has been suspended in its entirety, and no effort is made to establish an alternative system of law. Suspended violence in the territories preserves not the law, but its very suspension, and it does not constitute a new law, but a no-law situation, which it maintains and constantly recreates. Note that the law has not been abolished altogether, but merely suspended. This means that unlike the anarchy created by a civil war, or in the midst of natural or man-made catastrophes, law is not completely negated. The complete negation of law is suspended as well. The intensified, ubiquitous presence of suspended violence suspends not only law, but also the eruption of all-encompassing violence in the form of total war, or the creation of a spectacular, large-scale catastrophe. Israelis tend to represent and justify this type of violence in terms of security and the need to protect Israeli citizens from direct violence from the other side. From our point of view, it seems clear that the truly restraining impact of the VPV is not upon Palestinian terrorists, but upon the Israeli war machine itself. This is a form of violence exercised by the Israeli military apparatus in order to restrain that same apparatus, postpone its explosion. Suspended violence allows the ruling apparatus to function without law, without discipline, without ideology, but also without war and catastrophe. The territories are on the threshold of law as much as they are on the verge of war and catastrophe, but they are not quite there. The eruption of war in the present circumstances, when the Israeli army faces scattered groups of terrorists and a few small and poorly equipped militias, eruption of war in these circumstances would have led in one way or another to massive transfer or even mass killing of civilians. Since the territories are already occupied and the enemy has neither government nor an army, the only goal of war could have been to reduce dramatically the number of non-citizens, non-subjects, subjugated to Israeli rule, and completely destroy their existence as political beings. But Palestinians, and this is quite systematic, have been neither annihilated nor assimilated, neither expelled nor integrated. They are governed as temporary human beings who belong to the Israeli state system by being constantly excluded from it, cared for by being forsaken. The suspended violence of the ruling apparatus suspend those kinds of final solutions. total war or catastrophe on the one hand, and the rule of law on the other hand. And these are two potentialities, the total or some kind of final solution and establishing of re-establishing a rule of law. These are two polar potentialities that structure the Israeli regime by the suspension of their presence and the presence of their suspension. We believe that this is where thinking about the role of humanitarian intervention and human rights advocacy must begin. For if Israel rules the territories, not by sheer violence, but by the sophisticated suspension of law, total war, and actual catastrophe, it means that the goodwill and invaluable resources of humanitarian and human rights organizations not only prevent the worst case scenario. In doing so, in using their resources and goodwill, they also have become part of the logic of suspension, which is the logic of the ruling apparatus in the occupied territories.
Hi. My name is Sari. I work for AFP, French Press Agency. I had a question for Mr. Stephane Ojeda. I was interested in what you said, what prompted the ICRC to drop its emergency assistance program on the basis that, I quote you, the long-term solution is to ensure that basic rights, and that is humanitarian law, is being observed. But what happened in the medium term is what I'd like to ask you, and how are you hoping you or other international actors to force Israel and probably other parties as well to have this international law enforced? And a more general question that is somehow related, we've been touching upon the fact that there is a humanitarian crisis in the Palestinian territories, but somehow all the presentators have been referring to on the verge of a crisis. So I'd like to know, in your appreciation, yourself or Mr. Hansen, maybe, is there a humanitarian crisis in the West Bank and Gaza? And if so, could you try to characterize it? Thank you.
Nael?
I have a question for Abi. More philosophical question. I'd like to know whether his understanding of violence changes Hannah Arendt's understanding. As you know, in nonviolence, she distinguishes between violence, power, strength, authority, and claims that violence is always and only instrumental. And whether this new conception of violence transforms from being only instrumental, as is only a means towards another end, of being an end in itself.
Please.
Yes, I wanted to ask.
Can you repeat present?
Yes, I'm Adas from Traditional Human Rights. I wanted to ask you whether what groups or what forces exist now within the Palestinian occupied territories to resist the plan that you are portraying. What measures do you have in planning?
I'm Dr. Erwin Mesa from the Jerusalem Project for Democracy. I thoroughly enjoyed Nael Salman's talk. I think it was very comprehensive. The only part that I think was missing is that there is another side. And the question that I would have to you is, I would suggest that in presenting your talk, it would probably enlighten to us that listen to hear your rebuttal of the other side before people in the audience could say rebuttals. For example, when you mentioned the Oslo Agreement, it's my understanding that there were Palestinian violations of the Oslo Accords as well, and those Palestinian violations are not anything that you mentioned. For example, the size of the police force was violated, the types of arms was violated, the incitement within the educational system was violated. You started out speaking about Jerusalem, about post-67 Jerusalem. You failed to mention that pre-67 Jerusalem was occupied illegally, contrary to UN Resolution 194, and the Jewish population was also expelled from Jerusalem in 1949 during the war. There's other things, I don't want to take up too much time, but I think you get the drift. As far as the Palestinian mandate, you don't mention the fact that 78% of the original Palestinian mandate, when the original resolutions Balfour came in, is now in the state of Jordan, which is a Palestinian state which has a Palestinian majority. These are the things that I think would be enlightening to people like myself to hear these things addressed rather than a comprehensive unilateral view from your perspective.
Please.
I have a question to Mr. Ojeda. I know that it's your policy not to publicize, but to deal only with the governments. But if you did issue a public statement, I haven't seen it. I read it's very thorough every day. I sometimes read them out. I see the Israeli television, I can see CNN. I haven't heard it mentioned. And in general, I don't know whether there's great effectiveness in pleading with the Israeli government. I think the only way that you can make an impression is by publicity.
Anand?
But Mr. Aviv, not exactly this question, but just the last sentence or the last two sentences of your talk were the consequence of the whole analysis, the final consequence leading to what human rights or humanitarian organizations are doing. They are collaborating, or they might be collaborating with the suspended violence. What would you have them do? Rather than consequence, rather than theoretical consequence, I'm asking about practical implications.
Okay, last question is I will raise it. First to Stephane. Through your presentation, you talk about not to politicize or in politicized context, etc. However, your work, like any international organization and humanitarian organization, is very politicized. We like it or not. I will give one example, just one example. When the head of ICRC in Israel make a statement that settlement is a war crime. What's happened? It was Geneva, board shaking. United States make a statement that if this statement is not withdrawn, we will withdraw from our support from ICRC, and then the head of ICRC in Geneva say, well, no, this statement should not be mentioned. So a journalist told him, but is it a true statement or not? He said, no answer. So I would say that this is what, the frustration of researchers like us who work in this is what we feel frustrated. If ICRC will keep only monitoring, I will say, micro levels and don't see the inherent violence in the very colonial project. And this is why, for instance, I understand Nael presentation. I understand it like, to say, look, this conflict about land, and look what's happened in land. It doesn't mean that there is not something wrong in Palestinian side, but this is a conflict about land, and this is what's happened during negotiation the land. Last word for Adi, just a flower I threw it to your side, that I am so glad about that you analyze, when you talk about violence, you analyze the Palestinian resistance, and you put it strongly in the picture as actors of what's happened, and this is so it's not Palestinians as a victims and just receiving violence. They are producing violence, and we should analyze what's happened in this interaction. So I think this is very good point. So let me start it by the same order, Stephane.
Okay. So I have 4 questions actually. So the first one, what's done in the midterm? When we say, at ICRC, we stop the emergency assistance programs, as I told you during the presentation, based on IHR. What's done in the between this? And second sub-question is how to enforce this position. First of all, it's the position of the ICRC. That's maybe not the position of other organizations. We are pushing for this strategy, and that's it. Maybe other organizations have other strategies. So all this to say that maybe others, in the meantime, are still providing victims with assistance. How to enforce this position of IHL? There are different mechanisms. The first one, it states, we, as ICRC, we did not ratify the Geneva Conventions. We are only a humanitarian organization mandated by the international community to monitor the respect. So basically, we are in the field checking what's going on, and we're reporting to the states which ratified, look guys, this is wrong or this is right. There's a common article in the Geneva Convention saying that, the common article 1, saying that states must respect and ensure respect. So not only themselves they must respect, but they must for the others through diplomatic means or economic or whatever, they must push the others to respect. And this is not the role of the ICRC first, but the role of the states. The second one, yes, if the ICRC, through a work in the field, through persuasion, mobilization, and in the last resort, denunciation, we are trying to push for the respect of IHL. The third mechanism is justice, is the courts, being national courts or international courts. And you all saw these huge developments in the last years at the level of international criminal justice, with the Tribunal for Rwanda, for ex-Yugoslavia, and now the International Criminal Court in place. So this is the mechanisms. To your second question, is there a humanitarian crisis or no? Basic question. I'm a lawyer, I'm not a specialist in humanitarian assistance. However, we cannot answer bluntly to this question, I think. We must have parameters, basically to talk about parameter of education, to talk about parameter of work, of water, of food. So if I want to give an answer now, yes, we have huge problem regarding work situation, employment situation in the territories. Yes, we have huge problems regarding education aspects. We have as ICRC, we have the water relief program. We have problem concerning water, and it has a link also with the settlements. Now, for the big question, the food, because during my presentation, we stopped the assistance programs related to food. I will not talk on behalf of the other, but on behalf of the ICRC, nobody is dying of hunger in the territories. And now, my last thing to you, it's the mandate of the ICRC. The ICRC is not an NGO first, we are not a non-governmental organization, and we are not an international organization like the UN. We are a kind of strange body that nobody understands and is everywhere.
It's called a virus.
Exactly, a virus. and you cannot fight against a virus so easily. Thanks for that. I will report the person. So yes, we are a Swiss private humanitarian organization. Okay, so it's a private organization, and we have an international mandate given by treaties, the Geneva Conventions. That's why we have this strange status. And within this mandate, we are only working, most often the time, in emergency situations. We are not dealing with programs of development. That's not within our mandate. To come back to the confidentiality aspects and to the public statements, Well, I'm disappointed that you didn't see the ICRC press release. Basically, okay, I'm not a specialist, again, in communication business, but I think that when we put on the table the press release, the official one, it's out, and afterwards it's up to the papers, to the newspapers, to the radio, the TV to take it up or not. Some of them did. Some of them did not. And you did not see the ones who did. Okay. We are not going to make posters in the street with a press release. But why, and it has also a link with your question, why do we choose confidentiality? Because there's a bad aspect of this it's for me.
Yeah, right.
Okay, you received the press release by SMS. Yeah. So, why did we choose confidentiality? It's a working tool. You will not find in the Geneva Conventions, not even in the Red Cross movement, statutes, etc., this confidentiality. It's a tool that we chose in order to better serve the victims. And so far, it has proven to be the best one. However, according to different criteria, and I don't know if you have time to go into details, but according to different criteria, we allow ourselves to go public and to make a public statement. The main important factor that we'll take into account, the main important criteria will be the interest of the victims. Are we sure that by going public, we are going to help the victim? Are we sure that if tomorrow, after detention visits in an Israeli place of detentions, we go public about the conditions of detention, the treatment, we will be able, the week afterwards, to enter again this prison, this place of detention? I can tell you no. And in most of the countries around the world, we are the only ones to do these detention activities. I'm not telling you that it's the best one for everybody. The great thing is that we have in human rights and humanitarian actors complementarity, and institutions like Human Rights Watch, like Amnesty International, they have chosen a different strategy, which is good as well, and that's where you have complementarity. But the founding principles of the ICRC, it's confidentiality in all situations. Yes, Israel and territories is very politicized. That does not mean that because it's very politicized, we should ban our founding principles and change completely our strategies. And just to finish, I think I've answered almost everybody. Our work, I'm sorry, but the frustration of the researcher, I don't care. I'm here to help the victims, not the researcher.
I just want to
if the researcher is a victim, what you can do?
Anyway, I just want to reply for both questions from Hadas, I think, and about the militarization in the West Bank and Gaza and the measures to be taken and what should be done and what we can help to do, maybe here, both Palestinians and Israelis. I just want to go back for the reasons of this militarization. And, as you know, before the peace process started, and the Palestinians were willing for peace, and they wanted to have peace and their own Palestinian the state and to live in freedom. But 12 years passed without reaching any solution for the conflict, and the Palestinians, especially the citizens, they lost hope. And they became desperate of what's happening. That's why I believe that in addition to what happened during the second intifada, or the start of the second intifada, that became so strong and became militarized. But from my point of view, this was a big mistake. I don't agree with this militarization of the intifada. But I think the most important is the will for peace. both people should live together in a peace, live side by side in two states, living side by side, economic situation, in a better economic situation, better living conditions as human beings. And this is our role, to try to find a solution to the things that I showed here that complicated the problem. We don't want to complicate the problem. We started, for example, the peace negotiations started, and the Madrid conference assured that the resolutions 242 and 338 will be the basis for the solution. At least during negotiations, this can be settled, but to stop those negotiations now or before after the year 2000 when the Intifada started, this has led to many more complications. We have to go maybe for the roots of the problem, which is maybe the occupation, and to find solution to end the occupation and to get both people live side by side in peace and and in freedom, not like a master and slave. So this is how we have to try to find solution for the problem, and that's why we are here. We will try to help in finding maybe creative solutions, maybe to advise maybe the government that this route is not the right one, maybe to go back to negotiations and to give the Palestinians their own rights according to international laws, according to human rights. I believe this is the best solution. And the measures to be taken maybe through the help from maybe the international community to help in a stronger way. Not to let, for example, when two people quarrel and nobody is in the middle, they will stay quarreling and beating each other. But if there is someone strong that you go here and you go here, this should be the way. And put it in a certain direction, like maybe the roadmap, if implemented in a very stronger way, or other initiatives, if implemented in a strong matter with an international will to stop this conflict, I think we can succeed. But it needs really a good international will to end this conflict. Without international will and to find the solutions for this problem, to put the two states live side by side and generate the economy and alleviate the social life and the social conditions of both people, I think the situation will become more complicated.
Thank you, Nael. Adi.
Thank you.
I have to answer another question maybe, but
sorry, I thought you finished.
No, this was one of the answers. About the violations, maybe I just want to remind you that 12 years also passed, that nothing happened, no conflict was happening. 12 years the Palestinian people were waiting for this solution. And also there is also Israeli violations, that many agreements were not implemented on the ground as they were anticipated. Maybe on both sides there are some kind of violations, not only on one part. And according to your maybe concept that before 1967 Palestine was in Jordan, Palestine was never in Jordan. Palestine is in Palestine, and everybody knows where is Palestine.
Sorry.
Yeah, and we talk about the people who live in this place. We don't talk about people who live on that place. They went to that place maybe because, of the war that happened in 1948 and 1967. But we are talking about the modern history. We're not going back for many centuries. We are talking about the people who live now here, at least. Those people have the right to live in peace and in freedom. And we want both people to live together and create a peaceful solution. And there is a need from the Israelis themselves to try to change the mentality which has been maybe changed today, as if we took a look at it when the peace negotiations started. Maybe the violence has some effect, maybe the suicide bombings have effects, but this is a problem. And Palestinians, most of Palestinians, as well as myself, I don't believe that the suicide bombing is the solution. If we feel that freedom is the solution, and to go back to the roots of the problem and try to find the solution.
Okay, Adi?
I would like to start with a question that was not addressed to me, but to Ojeda, about the verge of catastrophe. I think that what is important here is not only the actual condition, but the possibilities that are embedded in the actual condition, in the actual situation. In the 90s, there were some scholars who developed a model of complex humanitarian emergency, which is a kind of euphemism for political emergency, but the main point is that they try to develop some quantitative, qualitative model with four main factors. It relates to famine, to diseases, to dislocation of population, and to violence. And they define catastrophes as an occurrence of where at least three complex emergencies, at least an occurrence where at least three of these two factors are involved on a massive scale. And I think that in the territories, the conditions are ripe for turning unemployment and malnutrition into famine and starvation, violence into massive killing, and local displacement of people into massive transfer. So we have the capacity to turn very easily with a very small investment of forces the current situation into a real catastrophe. And in this sense, I think that the territories are constantly on the verge of catastrophe, and this is the catastrophe which is constantly suspended by the way Israel controls territories. Now, in relation to the question of violence, I would say I don't want to go now into detailed analysis of Hannah Arendt, but first I think that she doesn't really distinguish between what we try to distinguish here, the direct and the suspended phase of violence, which is important because it creates a continuum between the outburst of force and the symbolic representation of political authority. Because symbolic violence is, on the one hand, a presence of violence, of an instrument of violence, but on the other hand, it is a kind of a symbolic, something that symbolizes power, and it can be the presence of the actual force can be diminished as we go farther to the other extreme of the merely symbolic representation of political authority. So, in this sense, I think it is not in line with Arendt's analysis. And the main point, as you actually said yourself, is that violence is not only instrumental. It is structural. It is created by the structure of the deployment of instrument. And like any other instrument, like any other technology, it has its own logic and its own consequences that are not related or not only directly related to the intentions of the one who operates the instrument. So, and I think that here too there is something more than what Arendt said about resistance to Sari. Yes, Palestinians are definitely actors in this situation, and the resistance is part of what defines the situation. But one of the consequences of this analysis is that we, I think, can say something about the forms of resistance taken by Palestinians as being themselves part of the same economy of violence. They are not initiative of free agents, etc. They respond to this to the system in terms that the system enforces on them. And of course, as I said, they respond to the system in the way that only let the system produce more and more violence. Now, the last question of Hanafi, which is, I think, the most substantial problem that we have to address here, is that what is the consequence of this analysis to the working of humanitarian organizations of all kinds? Now, first, I would like to remind you that I said that humanitarian organizations do not they not only play according to the logic of the ruling apparatus, which is the logic of suspension, but they also prevent the worst case scenario. I mean, there is a dilemma here. I'm not saying that it is very clear cut situation. It is ambiguous all the way through, and I was trying to point to the condition in which humanitarian work is carried, and to the some of the political costs that are inevitable. Now, what does it means in practical terms? Some of it will be developed by Ariela tomorrow in her presentation, but I can add, I don't want to evade the question, I would like to add, or to say the following. If you don't want to buy into or to be completely part of this logic, the least you can do is that to maintain a clear antagonistic position vis-à-vis the Israeli Authority, consistent and antagonistic position vis-à-vis the Israeli authorities. This is one thing. I think that there is a difference between humanitarian groups or initiatives or organizations that play the neutral, the completely neutral actor, and those that are ready to speak back to power as much as it needed, and not don't shy away from friction with the Israeli authorities, or even real clashes. But there is also other possibility. In our meeting last year, Amira has proposed a strike of humanitarian organizations. She said, well, humanitarian organizations should go on strike because they have become in different ways part of the system. And I think this, as Peter Hansen said in his opening lecture, it is something which should be there and be thought all the time. Not only as a vague idea, as a kind of utopic idea, or a kind of, nice, we talked about it and we speak, and now we go back to work after we, entertain this wonderful idea. No, it is a way to negotiate with the Israeli authorities. Donors are not only facing the victims, they are facing constantly the authorities, and they can organize and they can come either each on his own or on its own or together to the Israeli government and say, well, look, you are you have an interest in our stay here, so pay the price. Pay the price doesn't only mean to let us bring our lorries and carriers from Ashdod to Gaza, etc. Pay the price means to lift some checkpoints or I don't know, whatever it is. But it means to turn humanitarian assistance into an explicit political instrument.
Thank you very much, all of you, Stephane, Nael, and Adi. And we have 15 minutes break, coffee break, and then the next session.